In this session, we are going to talk about strength, weaknesses of genres and their implications in screenplay. What are the primary strengths and weaknesses of the genres that we have discussed in the last session? And what are the larger implications that they have in screenplay when we decide to try a particular kind of a genre? Let's see. Genre films are for genre lovers. So what does this statement mean? This statement primarily means that those people who like a particular kind of genre, or more than one or two genres, they would continue to believe in those kind of films, or they'll tend to like those kind of films. So particular genres work because there are hardcore fans, people who continue to watch similar kind of films or similar kind of stories, and they are engaged, or they try to continue their fascination with those sort of consumptions. For example, people who believe in the idea of love gravitate towards romance more often than those people who consider falling in love with the idea of love to be relatively more abstract or philosophical in nature than as a practical, choice that human individuals can make. So this is something that you would notice with genre lovers. People who love cars and automobiles are likely to continue their fascination towards action films, films which have long car chases, or films which show new cars, new bikes, and the way they are used in those narratives. There is a group of audience who oscillate between genres. So, and their oscillation between the genres are also well understood by the makers or the writers or the directors. And that's the reason where we have the hybridization process coming into picture. We have two different genre films coming together. Like I told you, that there is a sub-genre within a genre. Many times that transition from moving another genre from one genre also happens extremely fluidly in terms of writing. That's how two genres come together, maybe in the same film, and people do tend to identify with the drama associated with the narrative. That's why they look for, the more in that film. For example, the recently released AK versus AK, the Indian film that was released on Netflix. It's basically a meta film, but it's also a thriller as well. So it can be truly defined as a meta thriller. So here, AK versus AK is a film that oscillates between two different genres, an out and out meta philosophical film, which takes the treatment in the form of a thriller. So then there is Troy, which is a historical drama, essentially a drama film, but since it's also telling the story of an event that has happened in history, in Greek mythology or in the Greek narrative, it's deemed as a historical drama. Again, recently released film Enola Holmes, it juggles between three different kinds in that sense. Enola Holmes could be looked at as a coming of age film, has several elements of being deemed as a suspense thriller. At the same time, it also makes a statement as a feminist narrative, essentially telling a story about an aspiring, aspiring detective coming from the second gender, so to say. You don't have too many during that period of time, and having two brothers who are equally, engaging in terms of the work that they do. So Enola Holmes juggles between three different kind of genres in that sense. Okay, so strength of a genre, weakness of a genre, let's look at it. What is the strength of a genre? Staying true to the natural elements in the script. and visual rendition. Okay. So when you are writing, when you want to write a genre film, you have to stay true to the natural elements. Natural elements, something that we discussed in tropes and expectations in the last session. So when you are making a war film, you know that these are the natural elements that you can conceptualize or visualize when you are trying to write a script, which is primarily a war film. Okay, so there are characters who are going to make some sort of sacrifice, whether it is for a community, whether it is for a country, or for a piece of land, or what are they fighting for. So the motive of um, the narrative, motive of the characters, and where the fight is happening, the geographical land, the difficulties of the terrain where the fighting is happening, what are they fighting with. One of the very famous quotes um, that was told long back was, if Third World War happens, human beings are going to fight that war with stones um, and handmade weapons, pretty much like prehistoric times, because the world would be over by then. So it's that sort of a thing. So if you are making a film which is, let's say, a futuristic film which is based in, let's say, 2057 and post Third World War One, if there is one community that is surviving and there's a fight that happens within that community, what are these people going to fight with? Because um, if we look back at two world wars that has happened, it has already done enough damage for the entire world community, human community, to survive and sustain through economic depressions, for countries to recover. A country like Japan, how long it took for them to recover from a state of um, devastation that happened in 1945 with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. So all those things are considered, and if you want to really make a genre film work, you have to stay true to the natural elements and bring them out in the script and render them visually accordingly. So work of the narrative conventions become identifiable, thus matching the expectations of the audience. What are narrative conventions? These are the narrative conventions that we tend to use. So the basic idea where subconsciously, as an audience, you are being able to identify a war film than a romantic film, or a coming of age film compared to uh, a musical. You're being able to do so because it follows those stories, or those films follow narrative conventions. It's the conventions which subconsciously works in the audience's mind and helps them identify um, with the film, because they tend to match the expectations. As a writer, what you got to do is you got to know your audience's taste and play accordingly. One of the questions that came up yesterday is, are we not limiting our imagination by doing genre films, by writing genre films? And I said, I don't completely agree with this, because films are to be made at the end of the day. Um, and they're made for an audience. So you have to keep the audiences in mind. One example I gave yesterday was my personal example, saying that I know that the kind of films that I'm writing at this point in time, which if I get to make someday, I know what would be the audience base I'm looking at. It would be extremely niche to begin with. It might not be those narratives which would play up greatly in India. Um, so while writing, I know that I'm writing for an universal audience, and most audiences who can resonate with the narrative, even if they're in the remotest part of the world. So know who your audience is and then write for them. If I'm making a documentary which is extremely topical in nature, do I expect uh, people all across the world to appreciate it or understand it? Might not. So what am I writing? Am I writing a popular film? Am I writing a niche film? Am I writing a film for OTT? Am I writing a film for the theatrical audience? Am I writing a big budget mainstream commercial film? So it depends on on the project. It depends on what you want to write. what are your aspirations as a writer, as a screenwriter? What are your aspirations? What sort of narratives you are drawn towards? What attracts you? For example, I'm extremely drawn towards humanistic narratives that come up from the Middle Eastern part of the world, films from Iran, films from Turkey, um, part of the East European dramas, films from Latin America. Those are the stories that draw my attention. Um, so what happens is, as an audience, I have subconsciously gathered my wits around, gathered my um, thoughts around those kind of films. So tomorrow, if I'm writing something that I want to write, um, my my understanding and my exposure will come into play. So if we want our audience to be a lot more discerning and uh, be accepting of the kind of experimental stories or so-called different kind of narratives that we want to make, then we have to look for the strength within a particular genre. If we are dealing with a genre film, I believe that, within using the framework of narrative conventions, you can still go ahead and write a fantastic genre film which would work, and it need not be out and out pronounced on the face kind of a genre film. It can oscillate with several layers of subgenres and multiple genres and uh, yet be a good film. So it depends on you as a writer. Or the weakness of a genre, the same conventions follow a repetitive track, which is what happens most of the times with commercial mainstream films, that it loses novelty. It loses novelty in terms of subjects and narrative treatment. I'll give you a very small example, relatable example. Okay, we are a country so obsessed with uh, remakes. Okay, we keep uh, telling remake stories. Even mainstream films which are relatively bad or which are not great films, they were being remade. Even in 2020, producers do invest money in remaking films, which then didn't have much value, which definitely doesn't have any value at this point in time. So instead of looking for newer narratives or newer stories or newer subject treatments or narrative treatments, what happens is, if we are falling into the trap of writing a particular genre kind of film, then what happens is we tend to lose track and we follow repetitions. And narratives will be over and over trying to telling the same kind of stories um, on the loop. So the normative loop creates stereotypes, and we end up making a film with least original value to offer. One of the significant examples that comes to my mind at this point in time is Ram Gopal Verma's films. If you look at the filmography of Ram Gopal Verma, right from his early Telugu film days till Company, you would see he was somebody who experimented extremely and came up with very different kind of narratives and almost offering a parallel language in mainstream cinema, making cutting edge thrillers, investing in innovative horror dramas, or what he used to specialize in be the gangster narratives. Okay, what happened after a certain point in time is he kept repeating the same. So what we would have seen with Satya or what we would have seen with Company, we would see that 20 years later, almost similarly. So understand that a film also is based in a particular time and space. It works because in that within that time frame that that film was made at that point in time, it is contextual in nature and people tend to like it. And there was some sort of endearing quality about a film like Satya or Company, which makes it stay afloat in the market even 20 years later. But when you tend to repeat the same film in another film, trying to just bring in a little change here and there, then you are showing the weakness of a genre. You're not being innovative. Look at how an Irishman could work as against the recent films of Tamil Verma. Both are gangster narratives. But what an Irishman does, Irishman has a treatment which goes back to Godfather 2, sort of homage. But are you trying to pay homage to genre fans or genre narratives of the past by telling stories which are not innovative in nature? If you see a film like Inglourious Bastards or The Hateful Eight, Quentin Tarantino's, you can understand that what sort of um, history he is trying to play upon. A Hateful Eight follows the track of a Western and becomes a social narrative, talking about color and racism struggle within a community. So you see the track change instead of following the same story that would have been told earlier. So identify as a screenwriter, it is extremely important. Understand the strength of the genre, understand the weakness of a particular genre, and are you being repetitive in terms of writing? Is it not done already? So what is the novelty that you're offering in terms of the narrative? That will define whether the film is going to work or not going to work. Interactions within a genre. Let's talk about implications in screenplay. Interactions within a genre and the level of intentionality to show, tell something may lead to cognitive determinations. So within a genre film, what sort of engagement happens? Engagement happens in terms of characters. Engagement happens in terms of the fluidity from stage 1 of the narrative to stage 3 of the narrative. Is it organic? Are the characters interacting or engaging with themselves in the way it would complement the narrative? And as a screenwriter, what is your intentionality? What is your level of intentionality to show or tell something? And that help define the conventions. And that leads to cognitive determinations. When I say cognitive determination, I'm using this in the context of the audience, that their cognitive understanding of a particular genre and genre-based films and the kind of script that we tend to produce gets very pronounced because they understand the interactions. They understand the intent of writing. They understand what you want to say or tell. So as long as that marriage is not happening, what would happen is you tend to lose the interest of the audience and they would tend to lose the interest in the narrative. So it is not going either way. You are not writing a diary, you are making a film or you are writing a film. So there is definitely an audience which is there. You may or may not know the audience, but to play up to their minds, you need to identify who your audience is and see how you can push them cognitively. You try to make a Buñuel, you try to do a Tarkovsky, it might not work. I'm not saying that always tend to dumb down the audience. I'm not saying that. But the thing is, let's say, for example, in this country, especially in India, okay, the importance that we give to film education is least. For us, film has always been seen, films or television series has always been seen as materials of culture, as materials of entertainment. The moment it goes beyond, if it can strike a dialogue with the audience, the narratives that are made can be considered as stronger, important components of cultural values, then it would work. Then there will be importance that will be given to film criticism. There will be importance that will be given to the understanding of narratives, of different kind of narratives. As long as we play to the mainstream audience, as long as we continue to tell stories which are extremely mainstream in nature and there's a popular value, and a sentimental association to it, then we are not pushing our intellectual faculties we use. We won't be able to push our cinema at the first place because people don't have an understanding of who Buñuel is or who Tarkovsky is. So when you are watching a Tarkovsky or a Buñuel, because your understanding of European art house narratives are extremely low, you might not be able to relate to it. Or if you're not familiar with Russian formalism as you know as a film movement, you will not be able to identify those narratives, which is what happens most of the times. So when something similar is attempted in this part of the land, we tend to lose track because we have never seen something like this. This has happened with so many people. I'll tell you one personal insight or an instance. When Ship of Theseus released, I remember going to the theater and watching the film for the first show. There were only 7 people in the theater who watched that film. The first show had only 7 people in the theater. The film ran for 2 weeks, one show each. And gradually, of course, from word to mouth, and then we did some bit of social media promotion at that point in time. Instagram and other things were not that active. So it was only Facebook, which was used prominently. And then we tried to, wherever we knew, we emailed the poster and other kind of things. Just to make the audience aware of it. And there's several documentaries I've seen in theater where the audiences are low, as against a Salman Khan film or an Akshay Kumar film or any Telugu mainstream audience film. So understand the scalability, understand what the audiences expect and want, and see how gradually we can push them towards better content. So while writing, there is a significant implications of those things, of the genres, strengths and weaknesses within the screenplay. Genres deploy evolutionarily familiar scenarios, something that we have been talking about. Let's say, for example, relationship stories, where the writer has to make love work. Okay, so as a writer, if you are a commissioned writer and you are asked to write a relationship film, you have to make love work. When I say make love work, I'm not saying that you try to blindly offer the potential magical values love. Make love work within the narrative. It could be a breakup film as well. But talk about the enduring quality of 2 people falling apart. How the relationship, which could be based both on conflict and interest of individuals, as well as the love and respect that they have for each other, let those things come out in the scene. Offer strength to the characters to overcome obstacles at climactic moments. This is something that people tend to love. That's why love stories are worked. Any love stories you would see, the characters finally mostly try to meet. So everything that is within the narrative is basically a journey of those characters. What are they're constantly struggling with something. So it's that eternal human struggle which needs to be edged out in your writing. So as long as you're offering that, it could work brilliantly. So your climax will come into picture, your exposition will come into picture, your conflict will come into picture, and how you have threaded them. What is your way of weaving those narratives? Those things would help. Then developing a screenplay based on particular genres does help process human minds and actions. You are anticipating, as a writer, you are anticipating what the audiences are going to think, how they're going to react and respond to things. So you write with that conviction for audience to buy into that idea and presentation. Nobody wants a lesser audience. Nobody wants an audience to be dumbed down. But the point is you have to also consider their capacity and capability of understanding. So write something where it would work, irrespective of whether you're making a genre film or not. primarily if you're writing a genre film, know that you are playing up to the conventions. So first you have to identify the audience, then present your idea in such a way that it would go along with the audience's understanding. Both strengths and weaknesses of a genre create a social context for conversations later. That's how it's been the reason why we are still talking about Titanic in 2020 when we look back at genre films, or a film like Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge for that matter, is because those films become has left uh, a certain kind of a social context for conversation by looking at the kind of um, human struggle people had within the narrative. And what you are writing, is there a larger meaning to the narrative that you're presenting? As a screenwriter, this is a question you must ask always to yourself. What I'm writing, is there a larger meaning to that? And it is your quest for that larger meaning which would add values and layers and subtext to the narrative, because you tend to then look at the theory of the scene and understand why this scene is important to me, why I should write it this way, not that way, why I should introduce that character in page number 20. What is the role of that character, or why that dialogue is important? What are you trying to say? You don't need to make everything obvious. How do you mask in and yet hold the attention of the audience without dumping them? And is there a larger philosophical context, or social context, or political context you want to offer for conversations? For a film like, let's say, Black Friday, what is the film trying to speak? What is the film largely trying to say? If the film's philosophy is an eye for eye makes the whole world blind, then we need to talk about the perpetual nature of violence and how one trigger could lead to another. And violence need not be physical all the time. It could have psychological implications as well. So in such sort of a context, how do you place your narrative? That is crucial. Then subtext represents specific purposes for reading into the narrative and goes beyond for self-reflection or introspection. Self-reflection and introspection, both from the audience's point of view as well as the screenwriter or the maker's point of view, the director's point of view. That subtext are extremely important. They allow both the makers as well as the receptors, in this case the audience, the screenwriter and the directors, all to read into the narrative. That's why we say that we are not watching a film anymore, we are reading a film, how to read a film. So, many a times the common public might not be able to follow this kind of an expression, saying that no, but then we have always grown up watching a film, we have not grown up reading a film. So as a media creator, as somebody who wants to screenwrite and who aspires to make films or write films, it is extremely important that you start reading films, read into the codes and conventions, symbolisms, motifs, significance of scenes and sequences and narratives, and where they are placed, what sort of a space and time they are playing around with, why the characters wear that kind of costumes that they wear, why certain kind of music or color is being used, what is the larger meaning of it. So look for those things, and those would help, those points that you, or those thoughts that you would gather in your mind, are going to help you look at the subtext in a relatively better way and allow you to self-introspect or self-reflect. Then the humanitarian impact in writing to create awareness about the universe where perceived reality matches the actual rhetoric. What is the actual rhetoric? Actual rhetoric is your story that you're presenting. It's your narrative or your screenplay. Okay, there is an actual meaning. Somebody who is reading in the first reading, they get an overall picturization of, okay, this is what the story is all about. These are the characters. This is what they are doing. There is a protagonist, antagonist, and so on and so forth. And then there is a perceived reality. What would be from the reception's point of view? But how people are going to understand. People are bringing in their perceived reality of other things as well into the narrative. So what you're writing, are you giving enough scope for the reader to develop some sort of a organic subconscious awareness about the universe that you're presenting? And when I say universe, I'm talking about your entire narrative. I'm talking about whatever time your story is based in, where you are taking the story from and where you're taking the story to. So what are the human elements you are drawing upon from basic observations of life that you are integrating into your writing to develop that sort of a universe? How do we use genres? It could be argued that film narrative is itself a form of genre, as it relies on structure, conventions, familiarity. I've already spoken about structures, conventions, and familiarity is something that audiences, you as an audience or as somebody who is a film lover or a film viewer, develop that sort of a familiarity or a familiar understanding of the terrain of film that you want to watch, especially when you are watching a genre film or writing one. If you want to write a commercial film scripts, you will need to have working knowledge of the genre to utilize, or better still, transcend the conventions of the genre you're writing. It means what I've been discussing and talking about, that you understand the intricacies of the genre. If I'm writing a war film, this many number of war films have been made earlier. What am I trying to offer new? Is my story new? And how much of generic conventions I'm going to use? If you want to go beyond the conventions of the genre, you still need to know them. Because those films that has worked over a period of time, they have worked for a reason. And when I say worked, both from commercial point of view as well as from critical acclaim point of view, they have worked because there is a working knowledge or a functional knowledge of a screenwriter that has gone into play. So keeping that in mind, you can use genres. Locate your ideas within the generic framework as well as the structural one, and have fun either using genre conventions. That's something that you can do, that you can follow the track of the genre films, that these are the things that I use, by updating them or intelligently subverting them. A film like Cargo, for example, brilliant science fiction story. How does it draw or borrow from the Indian storytelling aesthetics, using the Puranas, using the characters from Indian mythological narratives, and trying to integrate them into a sci-fi narrative, and yet talking about the most political undertones of the period. So it is left to the intelligence and the smartness of the screenwriter to create a believable universe by either locating those conventions and seeing how those ideas can be posed. Analyze films which cross-pollinate genres against the grain, like I told you, a film like Cargo, incorporating incongruous elements normally associated with unrelated genres to offer something unfamiliar. Draw from 3 different genres and do a mismatch and try and see what kind of a narrative emerges. First draft could be confusing. Second draft might give you some sort of a clarity. So it depends on how you want to see. So that cross-pollination of ideas are significant. The concept is significant. Pushing the genres against the grain. Coen brothers often create memorable characters against genre. If you're familiar with the filmography of Coen brothers, you would see that. Think of Mad Max Biker, Leonard Smallskin, Raising Arizona, the schizophrenic psychopath Charlie Meadows, or Calmont in Barton Fink, or a laid-back pregnant sheriff, Margie Gunderson in Fargo. Okay, how do you create those sort of endearing moments for those characters to go past the regular conventional setup that anybody can create? Somebody who's a story writer can create. So if you want to make a difference, if you want, the reason why Coen Brothers films have worked is because they write it in that way. In a very unlike terrain, you try to place a character and see what comes up. That's all your writing. It's all your imagination. So those things might work. Some films begin in one genre and then in another. An example would be Dusk Till Dawn, that flips from crime to horror without warning. You don't even realize when it moved from a Western crime drama to become a body horror film. Hitchcock's Vertigo is another example, which begins as a romantic melodrama with supernatural overtones before debunking the supernatural, almost slapping our wrists for being taken in, then borrowing uncomfortably deep into the protagonist's mental illness. Okay, so a larger social commentary about mental health while beginning as a romantic melodrama. Genres do not exist in isolation is something that I said I'll talk about yesterday, but always in relation to others. That's how subgenres, hybrid genres emerge. Um, you are not telling a story in thin air. Your stories will have characters who would belong to a certain time and space. And in such sort of a situation, you're pretty much like human life. You don't live one kind of life. If you're a gangster, there's a possibility at one point in time you will fall in love. So at that point in time, your track is a romantic narrative. If tomorrow you want to, enter into politics by living your dark past, that becomes a political song. So those things happen. So don't become extremely watertight about your ideas. Each genre contains its own conventions and motifs. Okay, it's something that I've been talking about. What are motifs? Motifs are recurring elements within which the audiences expect to see. Okay, this is something that stays in continuum. The repetition of those elements allows the audiences to develop that sort of expectations, develop that sort of an understanding to identify the genres. For example, Western motifs include cowboys, horses, wagon trails, small woody shanty towns with saloons, a jailhouse, guns and rifles. You pick up any Western film, you would find all these kind of visual motifs being used. So we tend to identify a Western film by looking at all these elements. A science fiction film would have motifs that would include spaceships, faster than light travels, aliens, silver bodysuits, laser guns, and we tend to identify a science fiction film by looking at this kind of elements are being used. So while developing a screenplay, it becomes imperative to keep the motifs floating throughout the narrative so that the audience stays with the narrative. And at the end of the day, they won't be disappointed even with a genre film. It works when there is deep research and referential study that goes into the screenwriter's work in getting the motifs in place while writing the scenes with conventions. So while developing scenes, one of the crucial elements is keeping those genre elements or keeping those motifs in place. They allow you to play around with the conventions. They allow you to put the motifs in the right place, for which you need to do deep research and referential study. What I mean by deep research and referential study is you watch films, you take both physical and mental notes, you read, you travel, whatever you can possibly do in order to have enough referential materials prior to your writing. As a writer, you'll be looking at genre and form because they provide a set of rules. You might use the available conventions or tweak them to create something new. It completely depends on you. whatever be the reason for using them, the fact is that you will use them sooner or later, irrespective of whether we like it or not. If we are writing a genre film, then we have to follow these conventions before we bring them down or kind of subvert them. So it's now up to you how you want to play with the scenes to create the narrative. It is, as a screenwriter, it's the ball is totally in your court how you want to develop those scenes while writing a genre film and otherwise. So that's more or less what I want to talk about, the strengths and weaknesses of film genres and what are their larger implications within the screenplay. So I'll stop here. Thank you.